So next is the word annihilate. For your information, the word annihilate means to blot out or to wipe out of existence, to completely destroy. In other words, when the Englishman, Willie Lynch, his co-conspirators and his fellow slave owners, along with their descendants, their heirs and successors today, they are still among us, or we are still amongst them. When they are through with us, the natural native earthly humans, and particularly those of us of African descent, we should have no trace of our past. Not even how we came into existence, other than what they tell us about ourselves and write about us and educate us. Other than that, we'll have no trace. We should not know our way up or down. Am I pointing the right way? Up, down, east, west, north, or south. We must not even know where to point for up. Hell yeah. We must only exist in a state of ignorance and confusion, also known as darkness and blackness. So, having violently torn us apart from our natural and original state, and from our natural and original beginning, the architect, engineer, and scientist for the dehumanization of our ancestors and the dehumanization of us, their descendants, today, the architect for the everlasting perpetuation of the slavery economic system, Willie Lynch, prescribed that he and his fellow English countrymen and his fellow slave masters and criminals completely destroy our ancestors' mother tongue. And then they instituted a new language for them and us, their slaves. Now, please note very carefully that unlike what some of your black English professors, your black English scholars and educators will tell you or have you believe, the slaves then and the slaves now were not taught the British English man's language, period. But they, as you shall shortly see, they were and are only taught a bastardized version of the language. A bastardized version that would only further enslave them, our ancestors, and us, their descendants, today. Now, Willie Lynch continued, and I quote, "You know, language is a peculiar institution. It leads to the heart of a people," unquote. Now, what does a peculiar institution means? The word peculiar, and I must point out here, my friends, I use the dictionary a lot, and I recommend it a lot. There are 4 books I recommend, but I will talk about them in another presentation. But I strongly recommend that you always have an English dictionary with you. The closest we can ever get to have an idea or try and understand our slave master's mindset, his secrets, is in the dictionary. Always read the dictionary. Unlike how people criticize me, I don't know the language. It is not my language. It can't synchronize with me because no matter how I try to speak English, I always resort back to something close to African. The accent come out. The Jamaican come out. So it's not mine, and I'm not proud of that language. I know the history. I know the people. It is not mine. I just have to use it because the alternative, well, right? So let me continue. So what does a peculiar language mean? Let me repeat. Willie Lynch said, you know, language is a peculiar institution. It leads to the heart. The word heart here implies the mind, not this pumping thing here, but the mind, the seat of awareness, this seat of consciousness, if you will. What does a peculiar, or if you prefer, if you break the word apart, what does the word peculiar institution or peculiar? Look at it, P-E-C, pec, hyphen U, hyphen liar, L-I-A-R, peculiar. What does this word mean? Peculiar institution means. The word peculiar means, from the dictionary, one's own. It means individual, or that which belongs to a particular person or place. The word institution means the act of establishing, as the establishing of new rules, etc. Unquote. So, as the name rightly implies, the English language, which is the alien invaders, slave masters, conquerors, human traffickers, and colonizers' language, is a peculiar institution, meaning it belongs to them. Yes, the British, the Anglo-Saxons, European, Caucasians, and English is their language, not ours, brothers. So stop showing off on me with your sweet tongue. Let's get real. Speak it if you can, I mean, when you can. But don't try to put me or my people down for when we express ourselves and our overtones come out. I admit it's not mine. No, you get that. Let me continue. So, it definitely does not belong, the language, the English language definitely does not belong to some of you cocky, black system trained people. And all others that are telling me that my English is poor, that my diction is poor, that my Jamaican accent and overtones are too high. Can you imagine? And that I'm not, what is it, enunciating or pronouncing Her Majesty's English properly. Again, for your information, let me point it out to you. For even though you said it, it is obvious, it is evident that you still didn't get it. You are saying it, but you are not getting it. So let me try and give it to you one more time. It is, as you said it, it is whose language? It is whose language? Her Majesty's language, not mine. And as my late mother, Grandma Enid, would say, the frying pan a cut you out pot while them both are burn pan the same fire. You guys can figure that out. You are not English, British, European, or Caucasian. So let us strive to work together, my brothers and sisters. Let us try to work together and interpret the slave master's language together, so that we may use it, have an understanding and use it to help set ourselves free. Let us try and do that. I strongly recommend that. Willie Lynch continued, and I quote, he said, the more a foreigner knows about the language of another country, the more he is able to move through all levels of that society, unquote. For your information, and from my perspective, the foreigner, which also mean an alien that is being spoken of here, is not his, Willie Lynch's, Caucasian or European people. For example, it was not, and it is not the French, the Spanish, the German, the Greeks or the Romans, etc. But it was our African ancestors then, and us, their descendants, today, right now. As much as most of you, and particularly the Americans, Canadians, West Indians, South Americans wanna be will disagree and won't like this. But the fact is that we, the descendants of the transatlantic slave trade, the African transatlantic slave trade, are nothing else but foreigners in the slave masters, their heirs and successors captured, conquered and colonized lands. I must regretfully inform you that we will never be seen or treated as their equals in their captured, conquered and colonized lands. So please remember all this. That's my perspective. I await your comment. To give you an example of what I am talking about, please let me ask you this question. Do you think and honestly believe that the British, European, Caucasian conquerors, rulers, human traffickers, exploiters, imperialists and colonizers, etc., and I could go on and on, do you honestly think or believe that they would leave their abode in Europe, traveled thousands of miles, if not hundreds of thousands of miles, around the globe, killing, murdering, slaughtering, capturing, pillaging, dominating, and enslaving any and everything that they came across, and any and everything that tried to stand in their way, in order to control, lay claim, own, and control this, our planet, establish their gods, their kingdom and government, their names, establish their statues, their civilization, their slavery economic system. First, establish it for who? Themselves. Then for their heirs and successors, their heirs and successors, children, children and grandchildren forever and ever. Do you now honestly think and believe that their heirs and successors today, their children and grandchildren today, would now abandon the system that their ancestors have almost perfected, engineered and perfected in their image and likeness, and have given to them, thereby letting us become their equal? Do you think they would abandon that to let us become their equal and now share in the pie? Come on, let us get real. Thinking like this is what I call insanity, and the word is defined from their dictionary. I ask that you please stay tuned to this channel for my upcoming video titled Why I Think All Black People Are Insane. Please stay tuned for that. But let me continue. From this Willie Lynch letter, we can also see that one of the main things that is used to control or to contain people and keep them in their designated places in a society is their limited knowledge and understanding of that society's language. With a thorough and true knowledge and understanding of the English language, anyone could move from the lowest class or a lower class to potentially the highest class or the highest level of that society. So now we know why we have all the different forms of so-called English being spoken of everywhere. From my perspective, it was not, and it is not, an accident. It is not by accident, but it is by design. But that's something else for another time. Willie Lynch continued, and I quote, "Therefore, if the foreigner is an enemy of the country, to the extent that he knows the body of the language. To that extent is the country vulnerable to attack or invasion of a foreign culture, unquote. Please allow me to repeat this quote. It's very important, and point out something that is very, very important here from my perspective. Quote, therefore, if the foreigner is an enemy of that country to the extent that he knows the body of the language, to that extent is the country vulnerable to attack or invasion from a foreign culture, unquote. Please note, to the extent he, the foreigner, or more correctly, the slave, knows the body of the language, and not to the extent that he knows a degree of the language. For the body represents the whole of the language. And to that extent, the country will be what? Vulnerable to attack or invasion of a foreign culture. For your information, as far as Willie Lynch and his cohorts, the other slave masters, were concerned, their slaves, as I've said before, their slaves were not their friends, their companions, or their equal, nor would they ever be. So for those of you who think that you have arrived, who think that your slave master is your friend, your companion, and equal, because he promotes you and invite you to his house, etc. For those of you who happen to think like that, he's your friend and your companion, your equal, then you are not only a fool, but you are a black fool. And stay tuned, I'll give you all the definitions for black if you haven't listened to any of my other presentations. I'm coming hard with it because it's a fact. Their slaves were not their equal, nor would they ever be. In fact, if at all we are to realize the fact, or if we are at all we are to realize that the fact that they cunningly, let me repeat that. In fact, if at all we are thinking, or if at all we are using our minds to think critically, we would have realized that the fact that they cunningly and deceptively call themselves white and denigratingly and contemptuously call our ancestors black is evident that there is no possibility for equality. I, the Mystic Philosopher, say so. Why? Because through thinking, common sense would or should reveal that black is the extreme opposite of white and vice versa. And that it is difficult, even as a philosopher, I find it difficult, if not impossible, for two things to be equal and opposite at the same time. They saw their slaves, the slave masters saw their slaves, not only, and the descendants of the slaves, not only as foreigners, but also as their enemies, and rightfully so, because they knew what they had done to the slaves. They knew what their descendants, their heirs and successors are trained to do to the slaves, or that what they would be doing to us, the descendants of their slaves, today in the future. For he, Willie Lynch, had written the scientific, what I call the scientific, meticulously coined formula for slavery to last not for only his times, not just for hundreds of years, but for thousands of years, if not more. The slave masters knew the law also knew the law of nature. That is also written in the slave master's Bible, which states, and I quote, "Be not deceived, God is not mocked, for," this is the important part, "for whatsoever a man sows, that shall he also reap," unquote. The slave masters knew that and understand it. It is written in his own Bible, and it's also written in his own tongue and in his own language, in his own words. I'm just trying to interpret it using his dictionary and my latent common sense. And they also knew that the possibility does exist. The slave masters knew that the possibility does exist, that the table could and will one day turn. And that if the table turns, the slaves may be in a position to take what? Revenge. So they knew that they, along with their heirs and successors of their slavery economic system, let me continue, had to, and that they must do everything within their powers to do what? To keep the slaves and us, the descendants of the slaves, ignorant of what? Their language. Yes, I am talking about the British Anglo-Saxons Caucasian English language. For it is only in ignorance of their language can they continue to deceive us. For if we don't know their language, we won't even recognize that the table is turning, or that the table has turned in our favor. Please join me in part 4 as I continue.